afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Frank Zaccari, and I am honored today to be in a conversation about what is going to be the new normal. Now, as we start coming out of this crisis that we're currently all living in, we're hoping that things are going to go back to normal. Okay, but what's that mean? It's not going to go back to normal, not the way it was. We're going to have to find new normals in a number of different areas. We're going to have new normals for employees, for the workplace, for work hours, for their culture, for the market that we're going to currently be in, and then who are our customers going to be? Are they going to be the same people? There may be a new normal for that. So ladies and gentlemen, remember this, none of us are in this alone, and the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, in this conversation, we're going to show you where some of those rocks are. We have a very distinguished panel here. We have Sara Zaccari, who is a high-performing millennial. And since this age group, her age group, is going to be running the country and the world here in the not-too-distant future, let's find out what it is they're looking for and what attracts and retains those people, because coming out of this, business owners, you better be able to do that. We also have Dr. Dena, PhD. She is an expert and an author in building diversity, equity, inclusion training, and consulting based on mindfulness principles. And she is a fascinating speaker and author, and you're going to love listening to her. And then we have Sam Altawil. Sam Altawil is a JD. He's an attorney. And he's an expert and he's an author in creating and sustaining high-performing cultures. And he's done this repeatedly. Okay, so let me start with Sara. Sara, your age group will be the majority of the workforce here in the not too distant future. Okay, in this post-COVID-19, your age group is going to be leading the world. So what are the key elements that you're looking for? You're going to speak for your whole age group here. What are you looking for in the workplace as you come out of this?
So, yeah, that's a lot of pressure. So I think, well, one thing to kind of start off with is safety, which I think is something that wasn't really on the forefront of a lot of our minds and just our day-to-day business operations until this happened. And then it became, how are we going to protect us? How are we going to, keep our distance? That type of thing came into play. So I think that's something that will be in the back of our minds moving forward. But I think one of the main things is the freedom of flexibility. So with this time and all the changes, we've sort of been forced to flex in ways that we never have before. So I know, like with my organization specifically, allowing us to work from home was something that they've been talking about it, and like how we're going to work the logistics and how we, we don't really know how we're going to make this happen. And then literally overnight, it was like, okay, well, everybody go work from home. And that was one of the praises that we got from leadership, was like, this went off without a hitch. Like there was no issues. We sent you home on Monday, Tuesday, you were all logged in, doing your job, getting things done, working from home. And so I think that just shows that there's no need to be afraid of that flexibility in allowing people to work from different locations. We don't all necessarily need to be, in the office. And then kind of beyond that flexibility, just the flexibility of hours, I know is something that I don't have kids. I have a lot of friends who have kids, and that's something that there is important to them in working, is having a job that if the only appointment they can get for their child to go to the doctor is like right smack in the middle of what would be their normal shift, they want to know that they have that flexibility to go and take their child to the doctor and then come back and work and still get things done. So it's not, it's not a matter of worrying, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be looked at, like I'm not a good performer because I had this obligation that I needed in the middle of my day. So I know that's another big thing. It's just that flexibility in location and in shifting.
And you had mentioned about creativity. You've had an example, you told me, what Starbucks has done. Share that.
So with Starbucks, that was more, I guess that kind of ties more towards safety. So I know a lot of employees of Starbucks, and they have, during this time, allowed their employees, if they're uncomfortable, because most Starbucks are still operating like drive-through and that type of thing, And if their employees are uncomfortable coming into work, or if they're at risk, or they have family members who are at risk, they've allowed them to take a catastrophe pay where they're still getting their full pay, but they're not having to come into work. And then those who have chosen to continue to work, they're getting like time and a half for that. So it's just.
So it seems that the key here is being open, mm-hmm. and having the flexibility and allowing employees, particularly high performing, any employee, to determine where and how they work best. Does that mm-hmm. make sense for you? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where the creativity comes in for me and a lot of other people that I know, is that, oftentimes you come into a job or a role and, this is the best practice. This is how you get this job done. And that's useful to get you started. So, okay, now I know what needs to be done, but then we want to be allowed like kind of that creative freedom to see like, okay, this is what the best practice has been. I'm familiar with how this is working. And now I have this idea. Like, could this make it better? Like, could we change it in this way? Like, how would this impact things? And just, being in an organization that allows for that and listens to that and kind of takes that into consideration and is willing to be like, yeah, you're right. Like, that's a better practice than what the best practice was. So, like, let's change things a little bit.
Outstanding. Thank you, Sara. We're going to pivot over to Dr. Samuels. Dena, mm-hmm. the pre-COVID world is over. And I've heard you say this, and you said it to me. What organizations do post-COVID is going to be very difficult. And this is going to require mindful leadership training. All right. What is this going to entail? How's this going to look?
So I really appreciate what Sara said, because we really are shifting, and the millennials are for sure leading the way. And so thinking about paying our employees fair salaries, that's been an issue we've been talking about for a long time, but in the future, that's going to, I think, take even a bigger precedence. Also, all the things that she said about a flexible schedule, and also it really is going to call for businesses to really think about how they're interacting with others. So I'm not even just talking about the separation and the 6 foot, and also the being on Zoom more, or being on whatever platform you're using. But we're talking about how people are interacting. And I think about this as a moment of thinking about inclusion as well, that oftentimes many organizations are saying, I can't even deal with cultural inclusion and diversity right now. We just got to do our job. And forgetting that who's doing the job, right? Right, that it turns out that 3/4 of the people that are on the front lines today are people of color. And that tells us a lot about where our brain is, like what we're thinking, what we're focusing on, and what we're not focusing on right now. This is the moment that training is critically important. People have the time to actually do the training, first of all. And we can come into a I don't know if I can say post-COVID world, because it may be a minute, but as we open up again, maybe I can say that we need to be thinking about what will it look like to hit the ground running? What kind of skills can we be learning now? And so one of the things that I talk a lot about is the idea of mindful, inclusive leadership. And that's the idea that if you have any kind of mindfulness practice, whether that be where mindfulness comes from, which is a religious practice or a spiritual practice, it could be prayer, it could be some other spiritual practice, or it could be simply focusing on the present moment awareness, that it actually lowers your implicit or unconscious biases. And when I first learned about that, I got very excited, because I'd been teaching the trainings on unconscious bias for so long, and I happen to have my own mindfulness practice from my own healing journey. And so that all came together. I wrote a book about it, and this is really what I teach and what I'm invited to teach in organizations and corporations, et cetera, around the country and beyond. And the idea is using mindfulness as a leadership tool. One of the practices I'll share with you very quickly, because maybe it'll be useful for some folks, I call it a 10-second vacation. And really what it is if you on your own time, in your own, at your own pace, inhale for 4 seconds and exhale for 6, exhaling for longer than your inhale actually calms your parasympathetic system. It lowers your cortisol levels. And now all of a sudden, even though what's happening around you may be exactly the same as it was 10 seconds ago, you are different. You are now clear. You're thinking more clearly. You are able to respond to whatever the situation is, as opposed to react to it. And this is it's a huge benefit in terms of, think about how we tend to react to things. We tend to react based on stereotypes. There tend to be very exclusionary reactions we have. Yep. This way we have a moment, or even 10 seconds, to breathe and to come back and think a little bit more clearly of, what am I missing here before I speak? You can do this in the midst of a meeting, even whether you're on a video conference or in person 6 feet away. You can actually take that 10 seconds. No one even needs to know that you're doing it. And I came across this when I was an educator at the university. I was teaching a faculty member, and I remember getting triggered by something someone said. And my instinct was literally to turn around towards the board as though I was about to write something. And I could feel myself. I just took a deep breath. And then I didn't write anything, but I turned back around and said, okay, wait. I was so much clearer by the time I turned around, and they didn't know any different, It was a really great leadership tool to really be able to do my job the best I could. Yeah.
We've heard that most of our lives, take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. And didn't realize that we were practicing mindfulness at that time.
Absolutely. That's how it works, right? And there's so many other ways to use mindfulness as a tool, not only for health and wellness, which we know very well. There's tons, and there's over 100,000 books on the topic of mindfulness. Most of them are around health and wellness, but I use it as I said, as a leadership tool for cultural inclusion. So, for example, when I'm teaching implicit bias training, I talk about the idea that, how do we challenge bias when we see it in a meeting? What can we do? How do the virtual meetings that we're having, how do they inherently lower bias? There's so much around us, but using it as a tool when somebody makes what I would call a microaggression, somebody makes an offensive comment or something like that, how do you bring them in, call them in rather than calling them out of the conversation, so that you're engaging with them? And you do that all through, focusing on the breath as you are proceeding, and you're much more likely to be more effective.
That's outstanding. And Dr. Samuels has programs in a consulting practice where she goes in and works with corporations. And for you corporate leaders out there, you're going to need this help. You're going to need this help going forward. All right, let me pivot over to Sam Altawil. Sam has turned around toxic organizations multiple times, and he has turned them into award-winning organizations. Now, Sam, there's theory and there's reality.
Correct.
All right. What challenges are organizations going to face now on a new normal, given the fact that we're in uncharted territory?
Great question. Since we only have a short amount of time, I'm going to focus on a couple of things. But, there's going to be a lot of areas that we're not even going to know about until we get there. One of my biggest concerns is the mental health of employees coming back who've been isolated for a long, long time. For those ones who have not been working remotely, they've been just not work at all and have to go back. Some have some mental health issues and so on. So the impact of the isolation for the lengthy period of time, we don't know what the long-term or the short-term effect of it, but we know that it's going to exist during employees at some point when we come back. When it's going to happen, we don't know. When you've been isolated for so long, and you've been isolated away from others for so long, and you don't have that normal where you have the interactions with people every day, and you're not working remotely, you don't have those things. Those do have some sort of psychological effect on you. And there's a reason why, in prison, they isolate somebody when there's being punished. It's isolation, confinement is usually that's kind of a punishment in prison. And so people really feel that kind of a way that they've been in prison in a long time. When they go back to work, that's going to affect the work. That's going to affect their performance. It's going to affect their interactions with others. So those are things that we're going to have to be looking for. One way of looking for those are we're going to see a lot of companies have, for example, employee assistance programs where employees get to utilize that. And it's confidential. It's usually there's a behavior, consulting, counseling there involved. And of course, it's all basically confidential. They abide by the HIPAA rules and so on. What it does, what a lot of employees will find out, that how often this thing's been used, and they'll get some reporting to see, when we go back, so it'll be the new normal, how often they use, what issues have come up. Of course, no names, of course, are mentioned. They will know whether it had an effect or not. So that's one area I see that's going to be a challenge. The other area is going to be a challenge is the employment law area. HIPAA is going to be a big issue. The privacy issues and so on. Where the big privacy issue is going to happen? Where is it going to be modified? Is it going to be anything going to happen to make it different for this COVID-19? We're going to get to see that. But one of the most concerning one that I actually see is COBRA. And I don't know if you're more of COBRA. COBRA is continuous coverage for healthcare. You have a lot of people right now that have been laid off, or they lost their jobs, and they also lost their health benefits. COBRA is a continuous coverage, but they have to pay out of their pocket. But here they lost their job, their unemployment doesn't cover much, and now they have to put more money into basically their health benefits. Now we're asking them to stay at home to be safe, but now at the same time they're also losing their benefits. So there's a lot of things like that that's going to have to come out. And COBRA right now, we have to ask the question, has that been working or not? And if we have another crisis like that, are we going to be, doing the same thing? Because right now, COBRA is not working. And I think the legislators need to really look at that closely, because there are a lot of people right now that don't have health coverage. And unfortunately, COBRA is just too expensive.
Now, I had talked with had a conversation with they don't like to be called labor lawyers, employment attorney. And the employment attorney said, how are you going to handle when you, the business, say, I want you to work from home, and they get injured? Is that a work comp related? What happens when you're directed to work from home?
It is actually, and it might be, because when you're directed to work at home, and we've stationed others at home in the past, but here's the catch of that. When you station somebody at the house, you want to make sure that the station they're working on is the same as the station that they're working at work, which normally we would have done, we would have sent somebody down there to look at their office, make sure it's ergonomically proper. Everything that is just is the same as in the office. And they also have to take their breaks on time. They have to do everything on time, just as they were in the office. So it's exactly that way, but it has to be of course, at home. Now that means that if they do get injured, yes, it is a work, it's a work-related injury if it is on the job. But the way they determine that is they first go to their private doctors, and the doctor says, well, it seems like it's a repetitive movement based on work. Then, of course, they go into the workers' comp, they file that, and they take it from there, and the doctor determines whether it is a work-related matters or not. It's going to be based on obviously the doctor's report. But generally speaking, I would say anything that work-related, it is a workers' comp issue, correct?
Good. I've heard some employers say, I don't know how I should handle this. That was a good point, to actually go to the house when you can get into the house, because we're working with people now like cable companies who won't come in the house. So you get to do their job, reconnecting all the wires, because they won't come in your house. But as soon as you can, that's a very good point to make sure. When you set up somebody for a 40-hour period, not just temporary, and this is a full-time position that's going to be there for a long time, you have to set up in a way exactly the way it is at work. That way you want to make sure you're being compliant, you're being transparent, and every which way possible. So there are some benefits to working at home, and there are some, of course, some negatives as well. The benefits is that you're at home, you get to work, you don't have to travel, less traffic. Interaction with the team is less, and people like their interactions with the team. They like that team environment. A lot of organizations, their teams are like family, and they feel that they miss out on these things. And so leaders have to make sure that these regular meetings happen.
and those people that are actually working remotely can actually come in for those regular meetings and have that interaction.
That's outstanding. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we wanted to keep these short, to the point. Dr. Samuel, do you want to add something?
I was just going to say that what I've seen a lot of success with are companies that are doing just what Sam just said, is that at the end of the day, 15 minutes just to check in, or at the beginning of the day, or perhaps even both, for a team to connect, just so that there's FaceTime, but also you're saying what you did today for accountability, but you're also having a little bit of social time so that there's connection and belonging when people are isolated. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's extremely important that there's some interaction. And I've even heard some people say, and I've heard you say it, Dr. Samuel, you have this meeting, don't talk about business. How are you?
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing today? How is everything? How are the kids? That type of stuff.
And I think when going back to what we discussed earlier about if employees, how they're going to react after going back there, a lot of most managers and supervisors know their staff, so they seem to be a little bit unusual. Those are the kind of conversations you have privately, seeing how you're doing, what's going on, and maybe things like that. Because right now, when we come back there, we just don't know how people are going to react. And some are going to be thrilled, others may not be. So there may be some other issues there.
Exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I said in the beginning, our goal today is to give you hope. They're very short and we're to the point. There are resources in place that will help you adjust to the new normal. You just have to reach out and get them. We're going to get through this situation, ladies and gentlemen. We will get through it, and we will come out of this better than we were before. Now, please remember this. During hard times, do 3 things. Look up, get up, and never, ever give up.